Hey, welcome back. Thanks for tuning back in here. Just got a short basics breakdown for you again. Again, this is my fishing basics series. We're not concentrating necessarily on any techniques or any specific species here. You might hear me reference some species as I talk about different examples of things. But in general, this whole series is dedicated to folks that are wanting to get started in fishing, really don't know where to get started, don't know what they want to go fish for, and they're just looking for somebody to kind of guide them through that process. So that's my goal here is to help you catch more fish and do it in a way that doesn't break the bank. So again, let's get started. Today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the basic three different types of lines that are out there. You jump on the internet and you can find all kinds of information, but it can be a little bit overwhelming for somebody who's never fished before to understand why is one line better than the other and where and what applications to use them in. Now, I'm not here to plug any sponsors, so you'll see different line manufacturers and different lure manufacturers and things in different videos of mine. What I use because I like it, and I've developed that like of that product over years of experience in using it. So, the first line that we're going to talk about is monofilament. All right, monofilament is really, if you ask most people who don't fish, hey, tell me about fishing line, and they describe a fishing line to you, they're going to basically be describing monofilament. They're going to say something clear, and it's tiny, it's small, and relatively speaking, for its strength, it's not small. It's the biggest diameter line out there. 12-pound line, for example. The diameter of this line, because its monofilament, is going to be bigger than anything else fluorocarbon or braid related of the same weight rating. There you go. That's what I was looking for. But I'm not an IFGA person that needs to break down that for you. But basically, monofilament is what I'd recommend to a new angler out there. It's cheap to buy. You can buy big spools of it, like this one that's back here behind me. That's a Bass Pro Shop brand. It's 12-pound. I use that stuff all the time. That's why I have big spools of it. Small spools like this I keep in my boat, or I put in a tournament pack for emergencies. Now, mono does stretch, so as you learn more about landing fish and fighting fish and things and setting hooks, that may be a concern, but for a new angler, don't worry about it. When you get a bite, just set the hook and start reeling. Make sure your drag is adjusted. I'll talk about how to adjust drag and things like that in another video. So the next thing that we're going to talk about, keep this short, is fluorocarbon. Now, fluorocarbon, when you look at it to the naked eye, looks a lot like monofilament. If you really get to looking at it, the one thing you'll notice is that fluorocarbon, for its weight, is much smaller diameter. So if we looked at it under a microscope, 12-pound fluorocarbon might be, that big around, whereas 12-pound monofilament might be that big around. Again, for your average angler, that doesn't mean much. A big difference, though, is that fluoro sinks where mono floats. So if you're fishing deep water, you want to get a lure down quick, having having fluorocarbon on is better because it'll allow that lure to fall faster through the water column. Due to water density, it's always going to fall faster, through hot water than it is cold water. But the one thing about fluorocarbon is that it's much more invisible underwater. Now, there is no line out there that is totally invisible underwater. Fish can see everything. Their eyes are designed to see everything in their environment, so we're not going to fool them that way. But because it's smaller diameter, you get smaller knots. Because it's smaller diameter and it's got better clarity, you get less visibility underwater. So in really clear water situations or really picky fish situations, fluorocarbon is a good choice. I fish fluorocarbon a lot. But if you're fishing little surface lures, like a little pop R, for example, you don't want to fish fluorocarbon because it sinks and it'll affect your lure, or it'll pull your lure underwater in some cases. Right, so that's something to think about, and we'll talk about that later in a techniques video. Now, the last one that I'll talk about is braid. Now, braid has its applications, but let me first stress, as a new angler, don't think that, hey, I want to put braid on everything because it's not going to break and that means I'm not going to lose lures. You will regret it, and the other fishermen that fish the same ponds and rivers and lakes and things that you fish, they're going to resent you because when you get yourself caught up in someone's old braid, it's horrible. I would rather be hung in almost anything else than someone else's old fishing braid. But that doesn't mean you should shy away from it. It's just something that you should understand, is that if you're using 50-pound braid, for example, which is what this is, it's strong. You're not going to be able to break that off if you're on a fishing rod and you're hung up in a tree. You're going to literally need to use a knife or something to cut it. And you're going to have to cut it right at your rod tip, which leaves a lot of extra line in the water. That kills turtles, that kills fish, that kills birds. You know, don't do that. Now, where I use braid a lot is if I'm fishing a frog over heavy matted cover. You know, I'll use 50, 65, 80-pound braid sometimes. Where I'm bombing a frog way back there, when I get something that explodes through the weeds, I can set the hook really hard. I can keep that fish up. I can wrench that fish in and over the top, because if it gets down in those weeds, it's gone. I'll never get it back. I also use braid as a filler on my spinning rods, because fluorocarbon is pretty expensive, folks. So I'll fill my rods up with fluorocarbon, or I'm sorry, with braid, and then I'll use a fluorocarbon leader, and I'll tie that in with an FG knot, which I'll go over knots and stuff in a different video. Now, you notice that braid is bright yellow. Most of the time I'm fishing, you know, a drop shot or a wacky rig or an eco rig or something in, you know, less than 25, 30 feet of water. So I'll use a leader length accordingly. And I like to have my braid high vis, because I am getting older, and it allows me to see that braid right as it goes in the water. But then where the fluorocarbon goes down, the fish don't see that, but I can see that bright yellow braid up on top. And I'm watching for, you know, it to tick or to jump or to move to indicate that that's a bite. So that's the application that I use braid the most. And then secondary to that, like I said, throwing a frog or maybe a big Zara spook or something up on top, buzzbait. Or if I'm flipping or pitching to tight brush cover. And, you know, I can just horse a fish right out from water willow, for example, that's got a lot of root balls and weeds. Okay, but I digress. If I just had to run out today and buy a new setup for an angler who is just getting started, again, I'd go with that medium action spinning rod, maybe 7 foot long. And if it didn't have line on it already, you know, I would pick up a 12-pound spool of mono and spool him up and spool her up, spool them up, and hit the lake and go fishing. So I hope that helps a little bit. You know, it doesn't need to be complicated at this point. It just needs to work, and 12-pound mono will definitely get the job done in most circumstances for you new folks out there. So I hope this helped, and look forward to my next lesson. Keep fishing.